So we'll continue our discussion of this new topic. Last time this is basically general problems that arise in distributed systems. Last time we talked about clock synchronization as one specific instance of the problem. Okay. So I talked about how physical clocks on a machine can be synchronized with one another. We looked at various different algorithms, absolute synchronization with the time server, relative synchronization, and so on. Okay? And what I said towards the end was, regardless of the algorithm you use for clock synchronization, there will always be some inaccuracy. If your application demands precision on timestamps that is more than what the clock synchronization algorithm will provide you, then you are out of luck. You cannot actually use that clock synchronization protocol. Okay, so, and there will always be some applications that need much better precision and others that may be fine with whatever the protocols that you have today, like NTP, will provide you. So towards the end of the class, I started talking about this issue of logical clocks. And the basic insight was, in a lot of instances, we are using timestamps to reason about events, okay, rather than to do something at a particular time. There are scenarios where you are using clocks to trigger events at certain time, like every night at midnight run a backup on your machine. Okay, in those instances you actually need a real clock and real time. But in cases where you timestamp events and you're just looking at which one happened before which one, like in the lab, did your bird land before the pig could take evasive action, that's just relative. You just want to reason about the ordering of events. So the question was, can we design techniques that can do away with clock synchronization altogether? So we don't need the notion of clocks at all. What we just need is the ability to actually reason about in what order the events occurred rather than the time at which they occurred. So basically that leads to the problem of event ordering. Okay? So you want to define a total ordering of events in a distributed systems. Okay, what an event is dependent on the application. Okay, we'll just use the general term event. In your lab, the events may be when the bird has taken off, when it has landed, when the pigs are receiving messages, when they take evasive action. Those are the events you care about for that particular application. So depending on each application, there will be a certain event you care about and you want to define an ordering over those events. Okay? And what we want is to do away with the assumption of a global clock. Okay? There is no one clock in this system. Okay? Number one. And number two, since clocks are local, you don't even want to assume clock synchronization because there's always this issue of precision. Okay? So local clocks may be unsynchronized, you don't care, there is no global clocks. So what that means is the timestamping mechanism that we have looked at is not going to work for. If you actually use local clocks and you take the timestamp and you compare them across machines, they are no longer meaningful because the clocks are not synchronized. Okay, so you cannot use that mechanism anymore. So the question is, what can we actually do to understand, not understand, but rather derive an event ordering? Okay. So we are going to use this notion of a logical clock designed by, or proposed rather, by Leslie Lamport, same person who came up with LaTeX, if you use LaTeX. Okay, so back in the 80s. Okay? And we'll see how can you use this notion of logical clocks, okay, to derive event ordering. Okay? And the main assumption is that the processes in your system, okay, are going to exchange messages. Okay? They are communicating. In your lab, pigs communicate with one another. Okay? So if you have communication between processes, can we use just the fact that processes communicate to derive an ordering of events? Okay? And we will see how you can use this notion of sending of a message and receiving of a message to essentially order events and also do logical clock synchronization, not physical clock synchronization. Okay? So ideas are very simple. Okay? We'll basically see how to go about doing this. So to derive event ordering, we'll define this relationship called happened before. Okay? And what that basically means is, if you say A happened before B, that the intuitive meaning is event A, you can say, has actually happened before event B, even though you may not be using physical timestamp. You want to derive, given to any two events, you want to define a relationship. Did A happen before B? Did B happen before A? Or they are what we will call in some cases concurrent events. You cannot tell which one happened before which one. Okay? So the question is, how are we going to go about defining a happen before relationship? I'm going to use some concepts that you have to follow, and then we will see. Okay, so let's say this is machine A. Okay, so right now we only have one machine in the system. Okay. And there is a process running and there are some events in that process. Okay, let's say the program that you're running is essentially main. Okay, so read a file or read a record from a file and print the record. Okay. So these are two, since this program is executing sequentially, okay, you will basically see the read event executing before the print event. Reading of a file, because you are executing this program sequentially, this instruction or whatever, this part of the code executes before that part of the code. So you will say that this event has happened before this event. Okay? So if you have a sequential process, okay, and some event A executes before some other event B, in that process, it's trivial to say that A has happened before B, because that's the order in which the program, a single program, is executing, or a single process rather, is executing executing those events. Okay. So within a process, you can always derive a total ordering of events, and that just depends on the order in which those events have actually executed. The single-threaded process, so there should not be any problem. Okay? Is that clear? So in a single, if you did not have a distributed system, in a single system of a single process, this is trivial to do. Now we don't have a single process. We have a collection of processes that run on a collection of machines. Okay, so how will you actually? So if there is another process B that has this, let's call them A, B, C. This is machine M1. This is machine M2. Okay, there's a process running here on this machine. Event A is executed before event B in that process. There's another independent process right now running here. And event C has executed before event D. Okay? And let's say this is time is going this way. Yeah, I should have probably drawn that figure that way, but that's okay. So now the question is, can you somehow relate events A and B to events C and D? Can you say which event has actually happened before which other event? So, any thoughts on this? Maybe I'll redraw the figure while you think about this, so it looks a little easier to understand. Okay, this is time. This is machine M1. Event A here, event B, machine M2, event C here, and event B. If clocks were synchronized and there was a global clock, you would actually look at real time and say this event has happened before this event and so on. But clocks are not synchronized, there is no global clock. So now deriving event ordering is not that straightforward anymore. Okay? So in the absence of a global clock, what can you do? How can you order events across two processes that run on two different machines?
If they are communicating in some way.
Okay, so we will say if they are communicating in some way, we are going to try to use that communication, okay, to derive an ordering of event. In particular, the only way you can actually do this is as follows. Suppose that this, suppose this process actually sends a message to that process. Okay, this is the send event of the message. That's the receive event. Those are also events, the sending of the message and the receive of the message. So we are going to use a very simple property. Okay? The receipt of a message cannot happen before the send. Okay? A message cannot be received before it has been sent. Okay? You can only receive a message after it has been sent. Okay? Simple laws of physics apply here. You cannot receive a message before it has been done. So regardless of what the clocks on these two machines say, you can say with authority that if these are two events on two independent machines, M1 and M2, this is the send event of a message and this is the receive event, then the send must have happened before receive. Yes.
Is it going to be clear later? Why do we even bother to assume that?
Why do we bother to assume send has to happen before
Yeah.
receive? Is it, can you ever have a scenario where you can receive a message before it has been sent?
No.
Okay, so we will always assume this is an axiom in the system. Okay, send of a message always has to precede the receipt of the message. Okay, regardless of what the clocks tell you, if I tell you these are two events, send and receive on these two machines, okay, this is the send of a message, that's the receive of a message, simply because message is going to take a small but non-zero time to be received. Okay, it takes some finite, whatever small time it is. This event has to actually have happened after that event. Okay, so we'll basically just use this as a property of the system. Okay. Is there an explanation or some confusion that requires an explanation? Why you asked that
No,
question?
that's just too obvious.
Too
That's
obvious,
why I'm
yes.
asking.
So I think that once you understand that this is a very obvious fact, you can then derive actually an ordering of events. Okay, this is too trivial, but this is the only property we are going to use. Okay. So we will say within a process, within any process, okay, if the process is executing sequentially, you can order events. Okay. Across processes, we are only going to use this property that the send of the message has to have happened before the receipt, and then we are just going to use transitivity. Okay, basically say, so these are the two properties. Within a process, if A and B are events in the same process and A executed before B, then A has happened before B. That should be clear, it's a sequentially executing process. And then across processes, if A is the send, B is the receipt, then also A has happened before B. And then we are going to use transitivity. A has happened before B and B has happened before C, then we are going to say A has happened before C. Okay? And then we are done. We are going to use this property to derive ordering of messages. So what can you now say about event A and event D in particular? So you can now claim, in fact, you can derive this just by looking at this picture, that A has happened before D. Okay? Because the send has happened before the receive. Within this process, A has preceded the send. Within this process, the receive has preceded D. So you're just going to use transitivity to say that this is sort of the ordering of events across these two processes. Okay? So in particular, you can say that all the events after the receive in this process have happened after all the events before send in this process. So all these events and these events now get ordered. Okay? There is no clock, there is no timestamp, we just use that as a message that went from here to here. And that's it. Okay? Now you can also ask, what about C and B here? What about these two events? What can you say about them? Okay, so one suggestion is you cannot say anything. Is there a happened before relationship you can claim between those two?
You know, B happens after C.
B happens after C. How do you claim that? Can you use those properties to say this?
Because you sent a message to M2 and it was received after C happened and B happened.
So all you can do is you can order the send and the B, and you can do this, but you cannot use that to order. Okay? So in particular, what we will say is that B and C cannot be ordered. Okay? They are in concurrent events. You cannot say, because there is no message exchange to actually tell you what has actually happened. If it has so happened that another message has gone this way, okay, now you can order those two, because you know that C happened before that send and B happened after that receive. So you can essentially say that's an ordering. Okay? But if there is no such message, okay, well, these are the only events that can be ordered. You cannot say anything about those two. So those classes of events are going to be independent, claimed to be independent. Okay? So this property, although it looks very straightforward and so simple, is allowing us very powerful things. It's allowing us to order events across processes without the assumption of a global clock, without timestamp, just by saying that a send has to have happened before the receive. We can now order everything before the send in one process and everything after the receive in everything. And if there is frequent communication between processes, each such message will allow us to order more events. Okay? And this can, of course, be extended to arbitrary number of processes. You can have a machine 3 with another process, and if there is a message that goes from here to here that will lead you to, allow you to order certain meals. Okay? So you're just going to use these three properties. Okay? Within a process, the sequential execution, so you can order across processes, send has to happen before receive, and it's transitive. Okay? If you have any ordering between events, then you can use the transitivity property. Okay? And this is what the last point, which is relationship is undefined across processes that do not exchange messages or events that do not involve a message exchange, in particular event C and D. There is no definition, so it's a partial order. It's powerful, but it's not a total order that we set out to derive, it's a partial order. But nevertheless, it's giving us ordering. Okay? Now, what does this mean in terms of how do you do event ordering? So here is an algorithm that will allow us to essentially do reasoning on events and say which one happened. So this one is a picture that I drew, so you could actually look at this and claim something by saying, here's a message and I'm going to order, let's order A and D in this fashion. Okay? Is there an algorithmic way to derive this? Okay? This is what is called Lamport's clock algorithm. Okay? This is basically this notion of a logical clock and how we are going to order events. Okay? So what is a logical clock? A logical clock is simply an integer. Okay? Integer is going to increment every time there is a local event in the system. Okay? Rather than a physical clock which ticks every time 1 second elapses, logical clocks only increment when there is an event you care about. Okay? So it's just an integer that you are going to, so every machine or every process is going to keep a logical clock. It's too messy, so let me draw. Okay, so initially the logical clock values are all 0. If there's an event here, that will have an event B, that's going to have 1, and then you'll have messages, that's a send event, this is 2, and so on. Okay. So what we want somehow is a way to assign logical clock values or logical timestamps to events with this property. If A has happened before B, then the clock value or the timestamp you assign to A must be less than the timestamp you assign to B. Okay, so if A happened before B, you want to have a timestamping mechanism using logical clock, no physical clock, such that that is basically to clock value of A or timestamp of A is less than timestamp of B. Okay, and if A and B are concurrent events, then we don't care what the clock values say. We don't care whether it's less than, greater than, it's undefined for us, so we are not going to worry about it. Okay, so this is Lamport's clock algorithm. Okay, so first each machine or process is going to keep a logical clock which is simply an integer. Okay. Whenever an event occurs locally, you increment the clock value. Okay, and you assign that clock value to that event. So here's an event, let's say you printed something on the screen, if that's the event you care about, then you increment the clock value and say that has a clock value of 1. Okay, so you're going to simply increment. Okay. Now here is where all the interesting stuff happens. So if I, which is machine I, sends a message to machine J, it is going to essentially piggyback its current clock value on that message. Okay, you will include the clock value on the message. Okay. When the recipient receives the message, then basically it is going to take the max of the clock value that has come and its local clock value and assign, and add 1 and assign that to the event, receive event. Okay. So in this case, what's going to happen is the following. Okay, let's say there are some events. Okay. A, C, so this is 1, this is 2. So the send is the third event of this machine, so the clock has incremented to 3. Okay. So when this message goes, you piggyback, in addition to the message content, you're going to piggyback the clock value. And then here you're basically going to say the logical clock value is the max, okay, of the local one. Okay, let's say that's L2, and the one that has come, so that's here is 1, okay, and 3, that's 1. Okay, so this is going to get a timestamp of 4. Okay, so you just take a max of 3 and 1, okay, and you add that. So now all subsequent events here will just get, if there's no more message exchange, you'll just say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. Okay. Okay, so now you will see that basically by doing this, if you just look at this timeline, you have essentially assigned values because this happened before this event, so you'll see that the clock value of this is less than this. Okay. So you always have to take the max of the sender's clock, because that's the time stamp that has come with the message, and your clock value. Okay. This will ensure that you will have this property. If A happened before B, then clock value of A is less than clock value of B. Okay? So this simple time stamping mechanism using logical clocks. You are not using physical time at all. This is an integer that you assign to your distributed application that ticks with local events, that gets sent with every message, and at the receipt you take the max of the clock that has come and your clock. Okay? And then you increment your clock accordingly. Okay? This is referred to as Lamport's clock. Okay? So our logical clocks as well. So Lamport is, Leslie Lamport is the person who came up with this algorithm. Okay, I'm going to show a picture here, make it a little better. So here are three processes. Okay? Those are the logical clock values, okay, within each process. Okay? So when this M1 goes, the value 6 has to go there. Okay? Now if the clock there is already higher than 6, the max of the 2 is going to still give you that, your local clock value. So you see that there is no jump, you just basically assign whatever you did there. Okay? And the same is true when this message goes. Okay? Is that clear? So what has happened there? And so every time you send a message, you're going to essentially piggyback that clock value. So you'll take the max of this, and then you'll see that the next value is always higher than that. Okay? So here is an example of where you have to adjust it. So here you had 50, and then you basically, when this message and 60 came, you take the max of 60 and 48 and you assign 61 here. Okay, so this basically says now, if you look at all of these clock values and all of this clock value, so these events have all happened before this set of events. Okay? So now all of these are higher than these, for instance. Okay? Any questions on this? What we have simply done? Okay, so we have encoded the send and the receipt of a message by actually sending the logical clock value. And then simply because all subsequent events after the receive have happened after, you want to ensure that they have clock values that are higher than the message clock. Okay, and the way you do this, you just take the max of the 2 and you're done. If it's the max, it will always be higher. Yes, question.
So it seems a little weird that in example A, if you see message 4, you're piggybacking 64 there, but after the point, it doesn't increase.
Yeah, so actually I should have clarified that. This is the algorithm without Lamport's clock. This is the algorithm with Lamport's clock. What I was trying to say is, if you are using Lamport's clock, you would send 64 and this would have to have jumped. Okay? If you did not do that, you will see the problem. Then, let's say you don't actually do Lamport's clock. This is the send and this is the receive. Here the clock has only advanced to 54. Here the clock value is advanced to 64. Okay? So now you have events here which have clearly happened after these events, but they have clock values that are still lesser. Okay? So that will not, so if you now just take, if you say this event has happened before this event, you do not have the property that the clock value here is greater than the clock value. So you would have to actually run, so this is a case where you are using Lamport's clock, so you always adjust, you say I'm going to jump. Okay, this is just showing you what all bad things can happen if you do not actually adjust the clock as a result of the same. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so in the previous example on board, we can draw a wrong conclusion that B happens after C or before C. So it seems that in the Lamport's logic clocks, we can get a wrong conclusion.
Okay. So excellent question, right? So I was actually going to ask that question. So remember what we are trying to do here. Okay? If A has happened before B, then we want clock value of A to be less than clock value of B. Okay? This is the implication in this direction. If A has happened before B, we want the clock value to be less than B. Okay? And the claim is that we have actually achieved that property. If you take any event that has happened before any other event, the clock values there are actually less than the clock value here. This does not say the reverse. Okay? What you are asking is the reverse implication, which is if clock value of A is less than clock value of E, does that imply that A happened before B? That is not yet met by this clock. Okay? So in other words, what you are saying is if I have two clock values, I simply compare them. In this case, I'm going to take B's timestamp, which is 1, and C's timestamp, which is 2. And I say, okay, this is a timestamp of 1, this is a timestamp of 2. Can I say B happened before C? That is not guaranteed here, because what you want then is a reverse implication. If C of A is less than B, then that should imply that A happened before B. We are not there yet. Okay? We have only managed to come up with a clock algorithm that's going the forward, which says that I will ensure that if some event has happened before another event, it will always have a timestamp. Okay? I'll show you an algorithm in the next slide that will do what you're asking. So a good observation, it says these two, if you just compare this, you may draw the wrong conclusion. Okay? And it will be a wrong conclusion because this algorithm doesn't claim to allow you to compare clock values and derive relation. That is what you really want in the end, okay? But we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, is that clear, what we just said?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, so maybe that was not clear. Alright, so what Clamport's clock algorithm is seeking to do is simply the following. If you know that A has happened before B, you want to basically, that should imply that the timestamp you assign to A, you want to say clock value you assign to A, should be less than the clock value you assign to B. Okay? So in other words, you know in this case that this event C has happened before this event. Let's call it E. Okay, because you can see that there is a send and a receive. Okay? And so if that is the case, you want a timestamping mechanism such that the clock value assigned to this event is actually less than the clock value assigned to this. And this you are simply doing by the max here, because this is the max of the two. All events here will clearly have a higher clock value than the events here. Okay? What was actually pointed out is, now if you did this and I end up with a bunch of events and a timestamp, and if I simply compare the two timestamps, can I reason about the order of events? Okay? Suppose I actually just gave you a log of events, saying event A, B, C, these are this timestamp, event A, C, these are this timestamp, and you pick two random events, one from this log and one from this log. This has a timestamp of 1, this has a timestamp of 2. Can I just, by looking at this timestamp, say, because this timestamp is lower than this event has happened before this? And the point is that this, to do that, you actually need a timestamping algorithm that gives you this property, which is the reverse implication. Okay? If clock timestamp of A is less than B, if that implies A is less than B, then you are done. But this algorithm, we claim, doesn't do that. Here is an example that shows you it doesn't do that, because it has timestamped this with 1 and with 2, and you know that these two events are concurrent. So just by comparing, if you derive that relationship, it will be incorrect. Yes, question.
So let's assume for a moment that C did happen before B. Okay?
C did happen before B, okay?
So why it is the case that these couldn't be the timestamps? Because you're saying that if C happened before B, then the timestamp we put in C should be less than the timestamp of B.
If C did happen before B, then it would be true.
So what would happen in this case?
If C happened before B, then the only way that would actually happen is you need another message that went this way. Okay? And then because C has a timestamp of 2, since you are going to do the max, the timestamp of B will always be greater than 2.
Okay, what if the message arrived just after B has happened?
What if the message arrived just after B has happened? Then those two events are concurrent. You cannot reason about that. Okay, so you are asking, I'm going to erase this again. There's too much clutter. So this is a very simple example that you are asking. This is the send, this is the receive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is C, and this is B.
Okay.
And you are asking, can we derive a relationship between C and B? If B is actually before the receive, then the claim is we cannot order B and C, because those are what we call concurrent events. The only thing you can order in between this process, and these are independent processes, the events that actually happened after the receive and events that happened before the send. Okay?
Okay, so
So B is an event that is not in this set, so you cannot say anything more with respect to B and C.
okay, so concurrent is defined in terms of the message that are exchanged.
Yes. Concurrent basically means I cannot tell, because there is no real global clock. The only thing I can do is to assume that messages cannot be received before they are sent. So the only thing I can do is order everything before the send and everything after the receive. These two things you cannot order at all. This and this you cannot order. This and this you cannot order. The only thing you can order is these two sets. Okay? So those two would be independent. B and C. Okay, so again to remind you, this is basically time stamping without Lamport's clocks, and you'll see that if processes have more events than others and you did not do this Lamport's clock, you'll see that you cannot actually get this property, which is this one. Okay? Just by having each clock adjust its clock value, each process rather adjust its clock value, by piggybacking the logical clocks, you can achieve this property. I'm going to skip the multicasting for a moment and go to what was basically asked. Okay? So basically, the point that logical clocks do for us, or the property that they give us, is if A is event and that has happened before B, then C of A is less than B. The reverse, as I said, is not true. Okay? Nothing can be said about events by comparing timestamps. Okay? But the claim is you actually want to get the reverse property. You want to be given two events with timestamps and just look at them and say, if timestamp of A is less than timestamp of B, I want to say A has happened before B. That is what you use timestamps for. Okay, you timestamp events and then you compare them and you say, what can I say about these two events? So Lamport's clock doesn't do that for us. Okay, we need a new algorithm to do that for us. Okay. So this, that algorithm that we are going to derive next is what is going to give us this property of causality. Okay. We'll say if A has happened before B and then A is causally related to B. Okay. So how do we get this property? Okay. So we need a technique that is going to actually give us causality. There are other properties of causality which we will not worry about for now. For instance, there is a system, if it says we guarantees causal delivery, that also says that if the send of one message has happened before send of another message, then you need to deliver the message. So this is like in order delivery. Okay? But across processes, if two sends are ordered, then the receipt must also be ordered. So that's going to prevent out of order delivery and so on. Okay, so these are nice properties to have in your system. And we don't know how to do this yet. First, we are going to derive an algorithm that's going to generalize Lamport's clock and give us this property. Timestamp of A is less than timestamp of B, then we can guarantee that A has causally preceded B. Okay, what's that property? How do we get that? Okay, so we are going to use this notion of a vector clock that's going to generalize Lamport's clock. And we'll see what a vector clock is and how it works. Yeah, I think the best thing is to draw a picture. Okay, so this is machine M1, this is machine M2. Now rather than keeping one integer, okay, we are going to keep a set of integers, a vector of integers, one for each machine. Okay. So there are two machines, so your clock is essentially a vector, a pair of numbers. We'll always start with 0, 0. Okay, everything starts with 0. Okay. And we'll do essentially the same thing as what Lamport's clock does. Okay. Whenever there is a local event, you will tick your logical clock. Okay. So if there is an event here, A, you are going to tick your logical clock. So in this case, if your machine I, the ith entry of the vector, okay, is your logical clock, and these are other integers, which I'll explain what that is in a moment. So for M1, this is its logical clock, and this is what it knows about the clock on this machine. Okay? And for M2, that's its logical clock. Okay, so when event A occurs, then you are going to increment this, and you make that 0, 1. Okay, if another event occurs, you'll increment that further and do 0, 2, and so on. Okay, you will always take the ith entry of the vector for machine I. Okay, that's its clock value. Okay, on machine 1, you will do the same thing. Okay, so if you have event C, that's going to go. Okay, so basically, if you ignore all other elements, you are just doing what Lamport's clock does. You are taking your clock. In this case, your clock is the ith entry of the vector. When you send a message, you will now piggyback this entire vector, not just your clock value. Okay, so let's assume that you send, there's a send here. Okay, so you are going to piggyback, you send 3, 0. Okay, that's an event. So you are going to piggyback 3, 0 here. Okay, so this is the receipt event. when you receive a message, you do the same thing. You take the clock that has arrived, take the clock that's local, and you are going to do max of each element of the vector. Okay? So here the clock value happens to be 0, 2. What has come is 3, 2. So you are going to do element by element max. Okay? So essentially this will become 3, 2. Okay? You are doing the exact same algorithm except that you are doing it on a vector of integers rather than a single clock value. Okay, that's essentially what this is saying. Locally event increment the ith element of the vector. When you send a message, piggyback the entire vector. When you receive a message, do a max, element by element max. Okay, same algorithm generalized to a vector. Okay. Now the claim is by doing this, okay, we have actually gotten the property we want, okay, which is this: if the vector clock of A is less than the vector clock of B, then you can guarantee that A has happened before B. Okay, so let's take another event here. This will take it B3, and so on. And this one will become 4, 0, 5, 0. So on and so forth. Okay. It should still be the case that the send has to precede the receive. So all these events have actually happened before all those events. Okay. And you can compare the clock values. Okay. You can take this event, which is 1, 0. You can take this event here, which is 3, 3. And you can ask, is this vector clock value greater than this one? Yes. Okay. All elements of this vector are greater than all elements of that vector. So you still have the property that all these events, the problem, if you look at the vector clock values, they'll all be less than these ones. Okay? So what else does it give us? What can you say about these two events? Looking at these two events, you can say that they are concurrent. There's no message exchange. Can you say the same thing just by looking at the timestamp without me giving you this picture? Okay. If I give here as the two clock values, 1, 0 and 0, 1. Which one is greater? Neither. Right? Some elements of one vector are greater than others. Some elements of the other vector are greater than the first. So neither is one vector strictly greater than the other. To say that one vector is greater than the other, every element of this vector has to be greater than equal to every element of that vector. Okay. If here this is greater than that and the vice versa. So these two are not comparable. They are concurrent events. That's what the clock value is telling you. So you didn't have to actually look at this picture. Just by looking at this vector, it's already telling you that. Lampport's clock did not give us that. If you remember, this was single value, and we had this example where there was an event 2 here and 1 here, and we could have gotten confused saying maybe this actually is greater than it, but it was not the case. Here you will never have that problem. Okay, if they're independent event, the vectors will be such that always some elements will be greater, some elements, so they are not comparable vectors. You cannot say one is greater or less than the other. Okay? So because of this, now you have a property. Right? And because events are independent, you get this property that if you have two clock values that you can compare, and you say one is greater than the other, this guarantees you that A has happened before B, which Lampport's clock did not. Okay, is that clear? Now let's think about a little bit of intuition here. Okay, what are we getting? Why did we need this vector? What are we getting out of this vector clock values? Okay. So another way to think about vector clock, okay, let's not have 2, but let's have a vector of size n. Okay, so here is V1 vector. I should actually make this an array. Another way to think about a vector clock of an event is, what do I know about events on other machines? Okay. If some, and so let's say this is machine I, if you look at some jth entry and that has a certain value, what this is saying is that basically I know about all the events on that machine that are less than or equal to that, and there has been a send that has actually occurred before that. Okay? In some sense, you are not only keeping track of your clock, you are keeping track of clocks on other machines, and say that this event actually has happened after all of these other events on other machines. And you can basically say that the reason is whenever you send a clock value, you send your local clock value. Now this machine knows about event number 3 on this machine here, and so you basically now know for this event that, so there has been a message that has come from machine 1 that had a timestamp of 3, which is why that entry went from 0 to 3. Okay? So in some sense, as messages propagate through the system, they also send the local clock information to other processes, and so each machine is tracking not only its local clock, but what do I know? What is the most recent thing I know about all other machines in the system? Okay? Those are the entries in the vector. Okay? So by doing this, now you basically have some information about other events. Okay? And this is allowing us to track what is happening in the system. If there are no messages exchanged, you don't know anything. Until this message was exchanged, you see that the clock, vector clock on this machine for other machines was actually 0. So that you did not know. Only after a message has come do you now know about some event that actually was a send event, and now you can order. Okay? So that's another intuition for what is a vector clock. It is tracking not only a local clock, it's essentially tracking all other clocks. And when messages get exchanged, you update what you know about that other machine, okay? Because it has sent you its clock. Okay? And this is transitive. Okay? So you can basically have this second machine actually send a message to a third machine. And it will now send this clock value, let's say 3-2 with it. Okay? And then this machine will receive it, and this has to be a triplet now, not a pair. Okay? When that machine receives it, it will essentially find out about an event on this machine, even though these two machines are not directly communicating. Okay? A has sent a message to B, B has sent a message to C, but by transitivity, C has learned about some event on A, even though there are no direct communication. Okay? So vector clocks will get incremented for machines, even though there may not be direct communication, that's indirect communication. So this information will actually flow through other messages. Okay, so this is how you basically keep track of what you know about other machines and how you can reason about this. Okay? So now we have a property that is actually useful, which is you are timestamping events, and you can actually compare timestamps and reason which event has happened before which event. If the events are concurrent, the timestamps will not be comparable. Neither will one vector be greater or less than the other. Then you say that those two events cannot be ordered. This is a partial ordering, not a total ordering. So some events cannot be ordered, because the only property we are using to order them is the sending and receipt of messages. Okay, is that clear? What is a logical clock? What is a vector clock? Okay, so logical clock gave us only one direction. This is going to give us both properties. If A has happened before B, then vector clock of A is going to be less than vector clock of B, but the reverse is also true in vector clocks. In Lampert's clock, the reverse was not true. Okay? I don't think so. There is a figure here which is essentially showing the same thing with 3 processes. Okay, each of them has, so the ith entry there is its local clock. So whenever you send a message, you will say piggyback that, and then you are going to increment it. Okay. Now there is another property here which is it's enforcing causal delivery, which I have not gotten into, which basically says this. If send of a message has preceded the send of another message, the receipt should also be in the same order. This is sort of in order delivery. You don't want to reorder messages. So what this figure is also showing is causal delivery. Okay. So here are 2 messages, okay, that are going to the third process. Okay. And so there is this message M and this message M star. Now because there is another message that went from P0 to P1, you can say that this send, okay, and this send can be ordered. In particular, this send has happened before this send because you have this ordering here. So if send of M has happened before send of M star, if you want to guarantee in-order delivery, then you have to ensure that the receipt of this message has to have happened before receipt of that message. So if you have a causal prop system that ensures causal delivery, even though this M star may be closer to, not M star, process P1 is closer to process P2, and this message actually arrives before the other message, you will hold it in a buffer and you will actually deliver it afterwards to ensure causal delivery. Because the send is ordered, the receipt is also ordered. Okay? Most machines will not actually give this to you by default. TCP is not going to do this for you, for instance. Okay, if you want to ensure causal delivery, you will have to actually implement vector clocks and timestamp every message in the vector clock and use that timestamp to delay the delivery of a message. Okay? And you can actually figure out how to delay that delivery just by looking at that timestamp. Okay? So for instance, you will see that this M star has a timestamp of 110. Okay? And let's assume that only sends and receives are events we care about. Okay, when this message arrives here, this process is going to say that process P2 has actually seen a message that I have not yet seen. That's why its clock value is 1. So it is actually going to delay that until it receives that message. Okay. So there are ways by which you can look at the vector clocks and see that there is a message I have missed. It must be on its way, so I'm going to delay the delivery of this message. Okay. Now, how to actually implement the system, I'm going to leave that out. I just want to give the concept here. Yes.
By checking the timestamp for machine P, for process P0, they're assuming that process P0 sent that message out to all machines.
Yes. Good point. So here I should have mentioned that this is assuming every message is actually multicast to every other process. This is group communication. Otherwise, this what I said doesn't actually work. So you will see that every message is going to all other processes. Okay. So this is what is called causally ordered multicast. Okay. It is used actually in things like distributed databases quite a bit. So I'm going to go back now to that example which I had skipped, which is this example, just to give you a sense of why do you want to hold back messages and deliver them in order. Okay. So that motivating example is a distributed database. Let's say this is a bank, okay, and it's a large bank. So it may have a replicated copy of its account databases. Okay, so here is a copy, let's say, on the East Coast and the West Coast. Okay? They are replicas of one another. Yeah. Now let's assume that there are two events that are occurring on the same account. Okay? Let's say there is you go to an ATM and you withdraw some money from your account, and the bank, let's say, is running a batch process to compute how much interest to add to your account for the past month. Okay? And both of these are actually happening concurrently, in parallel. Now the claim is to ensure consistency, they have to actually execute in the same order on both sides. Okay? If you actually deduct the money from the account first and then run the interest job, you will get let's say a different amount of interest added to your account and vice versa. That should be clear. If you take the money out and then run it, the average balance for your account will be lower, so you will get lower interest. Okay, what you don't want is inconsistency where the withdrawal is executed before the second job here and vice versa. You want them to happen in the same order in both cases, okay, for consistency reasons. So the way this would be done is typically you will take every request or every query or update that comes in and you are going to multicast it to all copies of the database, and you want to ensure that all copies will actually execute them in the exact same order. There cannot be any reordering. If there's any reordering, you are going to actually have inconsistencies. The values or account values will deviate. Okay, so if you suddenly show up in San Francisco, you'll see more money or less money in your account, because your ATMs there will talk to the local replica. You don't want that scenario. Right? So to prevent this, you want to ensure that every update to your database is going to get ordered and it's going to essentially execute in the same order. Yeah. And the way this is going to be done is either you use causal ordering or total ordering, where you send all of the requests, all the queries have to be sent to all replicas because they have to execute. Okay? This is why we are multicasting it. And moreover, not only are you going to send it everywhere, you have to execute them in the same order. Okay? And the property so you can actually do this with Lamport's clock as well. This is a simpler property. You may actually not care Okay, if two messages, processes send you message, which order you receive in, you may not particularly care. Okay, it is okay to receive them in some order. But for some application that actually matters for correctness reasons. Okay. And if you do care, then you need to use these properties to reorder. Okay, ensure that there is causal delivery. Yes.
So to achieve total ordering, the two requirements would be you multicast every message that you generate to all machines in the in your distributed like system. Would that mean that peers cannot come and go dynamically in the system?
Okay, so question is, if you want total ordering, you want to ensure that every message is sent to all replicas. Okay? And then every request is received by all replicas, they order them and they execute them in the same order. Okay? This will ensure that every replica is in lockstep with every other replica. They all agree on the order. And then the question is, can you have peers come and go? Okay? So if you actually look at distributed databases, there are protocols that will block if some peer goes down, because you don't know what that peer is doing. So if all other replicas go ahead and agree on some ordering and that replica has actually done something in a different order, then that results in an inconsistency. So you will actually block. Okay? We'll talk about distributed transactions in maybe two lectures. We'll come back to this problem of distributed transactions and how do you ensure that the transactions execute in the same order. This is just allowing us a communication means by which you order them. Okay? There are additional things you may have to do. We look at two-phase commit protocols where this kind of techniques, or distributed two-phase commits where these kind of techniques are actually there. So the assumption here is, first of all, this is not a P2P system. Right? These are servers that will be relatively stable. But the equivalent of asking whether peers come and go is if a replica goes down, what happens? Okay? If a replica has gone down, it's not telling you what it did before it went down. It's to be perfectly safe, you cannot let any transaction commit. Because if you commit them in a different order and that replica disagrees, then everything is out of sync. Okay? So you may actually have to block transactions or not be able to commit them. Yes, so there are some issues that you have to deal with. Like that. We'll come back to all of that when we do two-phase commit.
Why is that the clock on the other here is went down with the latest one, like because it's being multi-custom, instead of starting with zeros, and we always take a maximum of always there.
Okay, so question is, can you reset the clock of that peer with the latest clock so you don't actually reset with zero? So that is how you are going to recover a replica that went down and ensure that it doesn't restart with zero. You obviously have to do something like that, so you don't start with zero because this replica has seen other events. Okay, so just simply resetting the clock value will not help. You have to at least start from where you left off before the crash, but hopefully you have to catch up with other replicas and somehow send a message and recover the clock value. Okay, so we'll come back to all of that rather than trying to come up with solutions. Now let's look at all this issue in more detail in 2 or so classes. Okay, but yes, you cannot just reset the clock values to zero. That will result in more problems. Okay. So what we have now done are look at 2 ways to use what are called logical clocks or simple integers that take upon every event. We have essentially given up on physical clocks and clock synchronization, and yet we are able to timestamp and reason about ordering of events. Okay. This is something you will actually implement in your next lab, simply because you must have realized that this lab required you to already think about order of events. If bird land before pig received a evasive, you take evasive action. You will try to now in the next lab re-implement this with either Lamport's clock or vector clocks and use that as a way rather than using physical clock and assuming time synchronization. Okay. To implement essentially the same logic. Okay. This will give you some sense of how to do this without assuming there is any clock synchronization at all. Okay. In this assignment, you have probably used clock synchronization, assume that there is some notion of synchronization, use some timestamps or way or order in which messages were received. That's okay. Okay. Now we'll make that more sophisticated in the next lab. Okay. So that's Lamport's clock, the vector clocks. Now we'll see how these ideas are used in a variety of different techniques. Okay. First thing we are going to look at is this notion of a global state. So I'll define what it is, and then we'll look at a way by which we can actually figure out how do you determine the global state of a distributed system or a computation. So I'll start with the definition. It's abstract. Okay, you may not even know why we define it this way, but we'll look at it. So global state of a distributed system is defined to be the local state of each process in the system, and so all the messages that are in transit, okay, messages that have been sent but are not been received, they're somewhere in transit. So this is referred to as the global state of a distributed system. Okay, so you may ask, what does it matter? Why do I even need to know this? Okay, so there are reasons why it's important to know what is global state. Okay, so think of, let's say you are doing a research experiment where you are running a set of parallel jobs on a set of machines. Okay? Each job does some computation, they all coordinate and produce a result. Okay? And let's assume that they are long-running job. Maybe it's a map-reduced job that takes 6 hours to finish or something, some such thing. Okay? Now what happens while in the middle of the execution, one of the process crashes. Okay? Then let's say you run this job on 10 machines. Okay, and they all have to coordinate and do some computation, and then the result that they produce is the result that you are looking for. And one process has crashed. What would you do? Okay, the simplest thing that you do is say the experiment has basically gone haywire. So you will terminate all of the processes and you will restart. So I'm going to restart from scratch. Okay, so that's one way to do it. You essentially wasted all the work that other processes have done. So all the computation that was done has actually gotten wasted. You restart, and hopefully this time all processes will finish and produce the result, and then you will compute your final result. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is basically tell each process saying, go write out what you have done so far to disk. Okay, this is called checkpointing. Okay, you have basically computed something until now for the past 3 hours. Write out the intermediate results of whatever you have done so far onto disk. Okay. Now if that process crashes, you can essentially restart that process from the previous checkpoint rather than all the way terminating everyone and restarting the entire computation. So this process actually has gotten this intermediate result. I am going to load that and have it start from that point rather than having it roll back all the way to the beginning. So basically in many scenarios, you rather than restarting, and if so, and maybe 5 machines, it's okay. There are experiments that run on 10,000 machines sometimes, or 10,000 cores. If one core actually has an error, you don't want to throw away all of the computation that all other cores are done. Okay, so most of these applications or that job use what is called checkpointing. They checkpoint intermediate result that allow them to essentially recover, okay, from intermediate checkpoint rather than having to start from scratch. Okay, but if you are not careful, if you simply just go and load some intermediate result into a process, you will essentially have inconsistencies. Okay, you want to ensure that although you are restarting, you want to restart in a consistent way. Okay? And the way you are going to define consistencies, we are going to not checkpoint a single process. We are going to have all processes checkpoint and start from that point. Okay? So the simplest way to understand this is to first assume there is a global clock in the system. Let's assume all machines are perfectly synchronized. Okay? If every machine is perfectly synchronized, you say every hour, pause, all machines pause, checkpoint your state, and then continue. Okay? So at 11, every machine, because they're all perfectly synchronized, they're all going to pause exactly at the same time. Every process is going to checkpoint its state, and then each process continues. Now if any process crashes, you roll back to the newest checkpoint. If it crashes at 11:10, you say all machines stop, reload whatever was checkpointed at 11 and continue from that point on. And that's fine. That's consistent. Okay? But as you can imagine, there's a problem here, which is we have assumed that there is a global perfectly synchronized clock, and every machine can actually take a consistent view of where to pause and when to checkpoint. Now clock synchronization will have errors. Clocks may not be synchronized. Okay? How can you take a consistent checkpoint when the clocks are not synchronized? Okay? That's the problem we are going to study. Okay? So to understand that, we need to first define what is state to begin with. What is it that we want the processes to checkpoint? What we want the process to checkpoint is take whatever is your memory state or your intermediate result checkpointed, take all the messages that have not yet been processed that are waiting and also checkpoint them. Okay, when you restart, you will essentially have the local state as well as all the messages that are in transit. Okay, if you have captured them all, then you will basically be able to have some notion of what is called a consistent state. Okay. We are going to look at a distributed way to do this, which does not assume synchronized clocks or a global clock. And this is referred to as a distributed snapshot algorithm. It gives us what is called a consistent global state. So here is an example to show you what can go wrong if you just assume that you could just use clock synchronization, for instance. Okay. So we'll define what's called a consistent cut and an inconsistent cut. Okay. The example on the left here, this is a consistent cut and this is an inconsistent. So there are three processes, P1, P2, P3, that's time. Okay, these processes are doing local computation, they send messages back and forth. Okay. And if you now take a checkpoint, it has to be such that you are checkpointing the local state of each process as well as all the messages in transit. Okay. And so the dotted line there, wherever it intersects each process, is the point where that process has taken a checkpoint. Okay. You will see that because clocks are not synchronized, this process took a checkpoint at this point in time. This is real time. Okay. This process has actually taken a checkpoint slightly later than that process. This process has taken a checkpoint even later. Okay. Because they are not synchronized, they will take checkpoint at a slightly different time. Okay. The question is that consistent or not? If they were all globally synchronized, you would say noon, so your dotted line will exactly be a vertical line here. And you will say this is where everyone takes a checkpoint. That you know is consistent because everybody is stopped at the same point. They will restart from exactly the same point. Okay, perfectly consistent. But if you are not synchronized clocks, they will take checkpoints at slightly different points in time. Okay. Can we say what is consistent and what is not consistent? Okay. Essentially what we are going to say is this is consistent. Just by looking at the picture, we'll do some intuitive hand waving and convince ourselves that this is consistent, but this is not consistent. Okay. So basically in each case there's a dotted line, and where that dotted line intersects that process is the point in time where that process has taken a checkpoint of its state. So if the computation restarts, that means P3 will start here, P2 will start here and continue, and P0 or P1 is going to start there. That's what it means. The question is, what does consistency mean? So let's first understand what an inconsistent state is. This is what we will refer as an inconsistent state. And the reason it's inconsistent is as follows. Because P2 is going to start here, restart here, and P3 is going to restart here. And this is what is going to happen. P2 is going to continue from this point on, okay, and it is going to send message M2. Okay, because it's basically just going to start from that point on. P3 has taken essentially a checkpoint of its state here. Okay, in this checkpointed state, M2 was already received before the crash and processed. Okay. Now if you restart this process here and this process here, this message is resent a second time. Okay, it is going to be get processed twice. Whereas in the original computation, if there is no crash, it would have been processed once. Okay. This can result in inconsistencies. That message could simply have been decrement this counter in your process. So in this, if you are checkpointed here, you already received that process and decremented it. Now if you restart this because some process crashed, you will get that message sent twice. So it's impacting state. These are not idempotent messages. Question.
How does the first, the A being consistent with respect to M3?
Okay. So we haven't come toward this one. So you're asking why is this consistent with respect to M3? We'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. So this is clearly an inconsistency is where a message is sent twice and processed twice. Okay. It can actually cause some problem. Because if that message was decrement as counter, now if it got processed twice, the end result to that counter has gotten decremented twice, that is going to cause some error. So you don't want that to happen. Okay. So we'll claim this is inconsistent. So that we now know. Okay, now question is, why is this consistent? Okay. So first thing is you will see that you never have a scenario. Okay. This also essentially tells you that the send must have happened before receipt. Okay. In this case, essentially when you restart, the receipt has already happened before the crash and the send is happening after the restart. That simply shouldn't be the case. Okay. So all message send and receive should either be on this side, or they should all be on this side, or they should actually cross the cut where the send is actually before the crash and the receipt after, but not vice versa. Okay. So now we look at this. Okay. So in this case there are three messages. Okay. Message M1, so let's assume the crash actually happens and then you restart wherever the cut is. M1 is always sent and received before the crash, and no problem, because all these two send, this is where each of these processes is sent. M2 is going to basically get sent and received after the restart. Okay? Again, no problem. Okay? The only issue is M3. In this, if you do this, then M3 has been actually sent before the checkpoint, okay? And it is actually being processed after the checkpoint. So if you restart this computation, okay, M3 is not going to get resent. Because the process is P1 is starting here. Okay? It has already sent the message. It's not going to resend. It's going to just continue from this point on. P2 on the other hand is starting here. Okay? So if the computation had processed gone normally, it would expect M3 to show up at some point in time and get processed. Okay? So somehow you need to capture M3 and re-deliver it to that process, otherwise you are going to go wrong. So that is a message we'll call in transit. It has been sent, but hasn't yet been received. So if you restart, if you don't capture messages in transit, you'll essentially have incorrect state because the message has just disappeared completely. Okay? Here, message is actually processed twice. That's wrong. If a message disappears, is sent but never received, that's also wrong. You don't want that. Okay? So you want a scenario where if you actually take this checkpoint here, not only should this process P1 here checkpoint its local state, it somehow has to say, here's a message I sent that has not yet been received. And somehow you have to save the state of that message. And when you restart it, you have to essentially rebuffer that message and give that to back to the application. If you do that, then you are consistent. Otherwise, you are not. Okay? So the two properties for inconsistency that we want to avoid is message should not be processed twice, message should not disappear. Okay? Each message should be sent exactly once, received exactly once. If you do that, then it's consistent. Okay? So first of all, we'll claim that this is consistent, assuming M3 is redelivered. Okay? But you do not have a case where the send, in this case, the send is happening before the checkpoint and the receipt is happening after. That's okay. Okay? But if you restart P2 here, P2 is going to expect M3 to show up. P1 is not going to resend M3. Okay, so M3 is just hanging somewhere in the network. Somehow somebody has to track that and redeliver that. Well, that somebody is whoever is taking the snapshot has to figure out. Here are undelivered messages. Save that state also. Don't just save the state of the process. Okay? So that is what is consistent and not consistent. Now if you go back to the previous slide, so we defined global state of a distributed system as the local state of each process and messages sent but not received. These are all the messages in transit. So if you checkpoint all the states such that every process is checkpointed its state and you have captured all the messages in transit, undelivered messages, and you restart that computation from that point on, there will be consistency. You will neither have duplicate messages, neither will you have messages disappearing into the blind somewhere. And each message will be sent and received exactly once. Now we haven't said how to do this yet. I'm just explaining what we need to do. Okay? Because we do not have this luxury of a global clock where we can say everybody pause at noon, take a checkpoint and continue. That luxury is not there because we are assuming clocks are not perfectly synchronized. Okay? And neither do we want to depend on. So question is, how do you take what is called a consistent cut? How do you get a consistent global snapshot? I'll talk about this next time, but I'm going to give you an intuition of what we want to do. Okay, so let's assume that you want to, so I'm going to give you a sort of a example from real life, nothing to do with distributed systems and all. Okay? So let's assume you're a photographer, okay? And you are trying to take a picture or you are trying to take a snapshot of the sky. And let's assume there are some birds flying in the sky. Okay? Now your camera is such that it doesn't have a field of view that in one snapshot you can take the whole picture of the sky. Maybe each photograph essentially only takes a part of the sky. Okay. So the only way you are going to take a picture of the entire sky is to take multiple pictures and then just glue them together. Okay. And you want to do this in a way that is consistent. Okay. What does consistency mean? You want to take a picture, you will take multiple pictures now. Okay, multiple snapshots of the sky, and as I was saying, there are birds flying around, so these pictures are actually being taken at slightly different times. Okay, so you want to take a picture that captures the state of the sky in a consistent way. What that means is every bird that was flying when you started taking this picture should be in one snapshot. Okay. No bird should appear in two snapshots, so it shouldn't be the case that you took a picture here, there's a bird flying that way, now you take a picture here, that bird has reappeared. Okay, now there's a bird that shows up in two snapshots, that's not consistent. Neither do you want the opposite, that some bird is not in any snapshot. Because when you took a picture here, it was here, but when you tried to take a picture here, it came on this side of the sky, and now the bird has disappeared. Okay. So how do you take these pictures? In a way that you captured the state of the sky when the state is changing. You don't want something to appear twice, you don't want something to disappear. Same is true of what we are doing of messages. You don't want messages to disappear, neither do you want them to be delivered twice, because both of those would cause you to have incorrect state. Just as in this example, if you did something wrong, you have not captured faithfully the state of the sky as it was. Now the equivalent of a synchronized clock is if you have a camera, a special camera that has such a wide angle lens that it can capture the entire sky in one shot, but you don't have that luxury. Okay? Wide angle lenses are expensive, just as synchronization is impossible. Okay? So you want to do this in a cheap way without assuming synchronization. Okay, so next time we are actually going to study distributed snapshot algorithm. Sort of builds on this whole notion of vector clocks and logical clocks, but it's even simpler to do. And we will not even use logical clocks, as you will see. We'll do something very straightforward and capture all of these messages. Okay? So let's stop today, we are out of time. Next week we will talk about distributed snapshots.